just some background about myself, why I'm here, how I met Sean. I'm an engineer from New York City in Manhattan, got my education here, live here now. I've done several accelerator programs and always have had an interest in entrepreneurship. And prior to that, I did research while I was in engineering school on warning letters. And that's what we're going to talk about a lot today. That's what I spoke about at Regulatory Affairs Professionals Conference several weeks ago. That's where I met Sean, Regulatory Strategy Conference in Baltimore. I enjoy doing speaker proposals and attending a lot of these conferences and shows. I'm also pretty involved with International Society of Pharmaceutical Engineers. I'm at Parenteral Drug Association Week, which is next week in Palm Springs, and try to interact with the American Society for Quality as well. As you guys has noted as well, a couple of great advisors on board for the company I have started, Global Key Solutions Corp., which provides regulatory data in a library fashion to quality professionals primarily. So Dan has joined me on this mission along with Ligia, both of whom are on the call. So thank you, Sean, for giving me the opportunity to speak to you guys today. The agenda and sort of the way I'm going to go about this is a lot like I enjoy doing a research paper. I'll give some backgrounds and just go through the inspection warning letter and 483 landscape. Then I'll show a case study, how regulatory data is used, and talk about some more recent nuanced approaches, a lot of graphs around data from documents. Stop me at any point. Some goals, learning objectives. Without a doubt, let's work on understanding why warning letters are important. And if you're already there, then what do you look for and how do you look? Methods on the strategy and planning side, new tools, particularly around how you can parse and contextualize documents. I'll dive deep into this, but we can take it as needed. So just landscape, this part I'll go through as essentially briefly as I can, and please stop for questions otherwise. An inspection is defined by the FDA as a situation in which the agency can enter facilities, warehouses, and other areas based on the fact that they have jurisdiction over drugs, devices, biologics, tobacco, cosmetics, and veterinary products. When the FDA investigator comes to make an inspection, they are generally walking the facility and working to conduct and understand how the operation is and whether it falls within some metrics of compliance and guidance, but they can't cite guidance within inspections reports. So the inspection classifications, really the way inspections can have an outcome, boil down here. No action indicated, voluntary action indicated, and official action indicated. Green, yellow, red, so to speak, and quantifiably so as well. The key understanding after this slide is that for 483s, for the actual write-up, and then for warning letters, we are speaking on the VAI and OAI inspections. So those inspections that were not seen as very minor comments and essentially checked out.
George, can I just make a comment? Can you go back to
Please, Dan, go for it.
when you guys look at, OAIs are about 10% of what the voluntary action indicated classifications are. But if you look at the database from George and of course some of us speaking from experience, those 445, that's a very conservative number, because the trend that you will see that is that a lot of these companies that are VAI are inspection after inspection, they're VAI. And in many cases, the FDA has also used enforcement discretion not to really issue a warning letter to a lot of these companies. So there is a lot of risk associated with those companies that are at the VI level, because for the most part, most companies don't really shift from VI to NAI. They actually shift from VI to OAI, and because the culture is really not there. So I think the figures are great when you look at them from a positive perspective, but from my perspective, they're a little bit deceiving.
Really excellent comments there, Dan. Exactly. And actually, I believe there's a slide through here. I really enjoy this slide because it kind of shows that process of how this is what the inspector investigator really finds and issues some initial classification. And then, as Dan noted, oftentimes the agency will reissue that final classification more severely, very seldom less severely, uh, in order to write the warning letter or issue that form. Yeah, overall inspection trends, I'm going backtracking a little bit. You get the VAI or OAI inspection. The investigator issues Form 483, and you're, as a firm, given 15 days to respond to it. What we've seen is a decrease in inspection amounts overall, yet a steady, if not increase, in citations. Wow, there's limited data, but we can conclude that the amount of production of goods has not decreased. So this paper really cites that in a manufacturing environment, but that's something critical to begin to understand. So again, less inspections with a similar amount of production activity or utility, import amount per se, if you're looking at foreign, and still more citations. And this is really what my research drills down to, is the FDA's inspection efficiency and risk-based approach on selecting which firms to inspect. And really that these are the other types of inspections, right? So there's for cause, there's routine inspections, there's different established programs like BIMO, and there's also a place for you to look at these inspections.
No. Yeah, I was just gonna say the other thing you've got to really think of, and this is kind of a trend I'm seeing probably in the last maybe 5 or 10 years, is that the inspection used to be the inspector came in, reviewed everything, wrote a 483, and then maybe somebody would audit that 483 and it would be done. But now what I'm seeing is a trend is your inspector comes, they take that data every day and it goes back to the OAI and they're re-inspecting it. And so what might have been agreed to as an observation then get escalated to 483s. So you're not being audited by one person, you're being audited by a group of people who are experts in the area. And so even though you might have a, kind of an understanding, you can explain things. I'm seeing the less opportunity for explanation and understanding, and more, and that's where the more citations are coming from, in my opinion.
Yeah, and actually, the slides don't even really need to correlate with this discussion here, but also really good to note on that topic. Through COVID, the use of essentially report requests, right? I mean, just document requests and then reviews. Now you can have the subject matter expert reviewing documents. This may have been done in less quantity before, so now exactly it leads to such outcomes.
Maybe the other thing that can be said is that remember there's also been a shift of companies moving from the US to other countries, India, China, Singapore, Europe, even Mexico and South America. So those companies, those sites do have a less exposure to the FDA enforcement culture, and they go through some kind of a learning period. And if you notice, and I think George, maybe this is something that we could explore later on, it's sort of compare the difference in terms of inspection citations given to domestic companies versus foreign companies, because I think that there's a possibility and a high probability that we'll see that the FDA does spend more time and effort making sure that those foreign inspections are performed, because there have been issues with data integrity, issues with falsification, issues with really very poor GMB practices. So that's also been part of the shift, if I can say that.
Actually, that's right. I'll just do one more slide to cover why warning letters are important, Dan, but then essentially let's talk about a case study in which the Congress wrote a letter to the FDA around foreign investigators and inspectors. But it sounds like we've essentially covered the landscape. Warning letters are structured differently than 483s. They are letters. 483s are generally can be handwritten, written right by the investigator, as that chart had shown. Warning letters are really, a 483 is that list of observations. Both cases, you have the ability to respond as a firm, but the warning letter is really working to build that case against you, right? Whether it's a shutdown or an injunction, seizure, recall, whether it's voluntary or not, those are the outcomes the agency is working towards with the issuance of the warning letter.
Rama, do you want to ask your question aloud?
Hi guys, apologies, I'm a little bit sick today, coming down with a cold. But my question is, if a foreign manufacturer is no longer distributing in the US, but they do have a facility listing registered, they have products registered, 510K, 510K exempt, could they still be subject to an inspection even if they're not distributing in the US?
The answer is yes, so long as you have an active say registration, the FDA will consider that you are due to distribute product anytime you choose to do so. So the FDA will assume that the fact that you're not distributing doesn't mean that you have stopped permanently doing that. So if you, as a foreign company, do not want to be inspected by the FDA because you're no longer distributing, then you just need to deregister, and then they're going to leave you alone.
Yeah, it's a good point. There's been cases.
I've actually managed several inspections for clients that they were maintaining an active registration because their investors wanted it and they thought it made them look better to the investors. And then the FDA came and they were like totally like not ready, not prepared, couldn't explain that, and that their QMS wasn't being utilized because they weren't in distribution. And yeah, it can be a little bit of a mess.
Yeah, I can just add that also if the medical device is still active, the registration has to stay active, and then there's an expiration date on those medical devices. So definitely those foreign offices are subject, or companies are subject to inspection.
So then I have a follow-up question. So I know this is like specifically towards the FDA, but for example, in Health Canada, anybody who's holding, similarly, anybody who's holding an establishment license is subject every 5 to 7 years to an inspection. So as part of like the routine inspections for FDA, is this kind of similar expectation? It's like a set number of years that there should be a routine inspection for a facility that's registered or that has products registered?
Yeah, there's the statutory requirement that mandates the FDA to inspect facilities every 2 years. That does not happen anymore for different reasons. One of them being resources and workload. And so what the FDA has done is actually shifted a little bit to identify companies that are high risk, to have then those companies being inspected more frequently than companies that are under NAI and that have not represented a risk to the agency or to the patient. So yes, there is a statutory requirement.
Yeah. And that's what I can show some statistics on a little later. let's essentially recap. Sounds like we all have a great understanding of the inspection warning letter 483 landscape. A direct example of use, Dan was going back to the use of inspection data based on geography. So this is an assessment from Congress to the FDA, actually assessing inspectors that had more than 10 inspections in India and China. And what they looked at was, for the inspectors that had more than 10 inspections, how frequently were they issuing the Form 483? How frequently were observations being found on a per inspection basis? And so they actually concluded that several inspectors that had both inspection histories in the US and India and China had significant variation in that number. Close to 80% of the time in the US, these inspectors would issue a Form 483, and that's, of course, those OAI, VAI inspections. Meanwhile, in India and China, they would have rates between 6.7 and 11.4% for China and 9.5% for India. They use this data on a per inspector, per region, per issuance basis, right? So amount of 483s over amount of inspections to come to this quote. This is directly from the letter, that they're seriously evaluating the disturbing possibility of fraud in this case. So the reason I give this kind of staunch example is because it's a direct use of a fractional assessment with several parameters on inspectors, investigators, for coming to a pretty drastic conclusion. And the agency, this was issued in June of 2024. There hasn't been a conclusion as of late. So that should give a good example. I want to move on for the rest of the conversation into the more data, statistics, and graph landscape. So that's kind of where we are now. So there's a couple pretty interesting papers out there. I'm going to start with ones that I have not written. This one is from a professor and a researcher in China both at Peking University. And I really enjoy this because it gives a high-level overview of warning letters. So now we're going to break into mostly warning letter assessments. This graph depicts word counts of warning letters on an annualized basis. So you can see, starting at 1996, ending 2022, how many words focused on these specific topics for the time frame. And really the focus after figure 2 for this paper is the understanding that instructions for further response, as well as the ideas of recommendations around both third-party help and just looking at guidances and readings, have increased the most, particularly word count wise, instructions for further response. That's again where figure 3 comes in for this paper. So again, demonstrating that really in the last 10, 15 years, the agency has began to understand that firms have two problems. By the time they've gotten to a warning letter, they're probably relatively incapable of solving the issues on their own, and they need guidance on how to go about doing it. So this is the graph for seeking third-party help within the same time frame. And if you talk to individuals in the agency, Dan, feel free to comment, but really there's been a push to essentially guide firms to how to respond and then what to do, right? Go seek third-party help. So I wanted, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, the inadequacy of the responses. Look, companies get a warning letter first and foremost, not just because of the 483. It's one element, but it's not the element that triggers or drives the issuance of a warning letter. it's that response from the company that actually triggers the warning letter. And what I mean by that response is the inadequacy, the inability of the company to really propose solutions, corrective actions that would provide a certain level of comfort to the agency that now the agency can trust on the fact that the firm understood the issues. So the companies get the warning letter not just because of the 483, but because really mainly of the poor response. And because of that poor response, the agency then says to the companies, listen, you don't know how to respond. You don't understand your systemic issues. You need help. And that help comes from external consultants.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's something to really, this research paper really makes the case of that. And going from there, your mind may be wandering in several places. One thing you may be wondering is, well, in what quantity? Maybe over the 10-year time frame, warnings became far less popular, right? Maybe the agency has employed new practices, or firms simply just became more compliant. That is certainly not the case. This is from the paper I have published back in November of this year. And what it goes to show in this graph, while it's not line by line, these figures should help provide better context. Warning letters issued as a fraction of inspection volume have pretty drastically increased from the last 5 years through COVID, almost doubling for overall, but definitely doubling for devices and drugs. And before I even dive further on this particular topic, why this matters moving forward, of course, we can recognize third-party oversight and recommendation from the agency has arrived. Next steps are directly in the document, and instructions have added clarity. Volume has not slowed down, and moving forward, this serves as a baseline for starting to understand, okay, well, is there a way to establish a baseline of compliance for firms? Obviously, if we can have all firms become more compliant, the agency can continue to become more efficient and industry can advance at a faster pace. That's really the goal behind all of these graphs, papers, and statistics. It's those two things: more efficiency, faster advancement. So there's another paper that entirely covers mathematically establishing a baseline for compliance. I like this graph in particular because you end up seeing that if an action is issued at time T1 to firm 1, this is generally, at least mathematically, how a cohort of companies would react. The firm would be essentially forced to become more compliant, or at least remediate the actions if they want to stay operating. At least that's been the status quo, but we should certainly have a discussion around drug shortages and firms that have simply become so big they've monopolized a single drug pathway. So now they don't need to stay compliant even upon warning letter issuance. But this is without that assumption, right? This is assuming the firm does listen to the agency. And then assuming that friends, which is about 50 out of the 100 extrapolated lines in this graph, would also listen and understand, thanks to the availability of the data, what to do, right? So there's a group of companies that would at least be aware enough to say, okay, this is what my friend or my competitor, however you want to call this variable friends, this is what they did to become more compliant. We will do it for safety, right? And then the ideal of this, and another graph, I think figure 5 in this specific paper, shows this over time, T1, 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 basically over a series of years, and why you can't just have routine inspections, but they must be random, at least partially in nature. So this paper provides excellent support for those types of activities by the FDA, right? this is the paper I jumped to, and now we're jumping back a little bit, but essentially the further understanding that, okay, you have an understanding that compliance comes from a warning letter. You see what the agency is doing around warning letters. What about pure warning letter volume? Well, we've seen a couple of things. The agency has become more efficient on a volume metric basis, right? So if you just assess the amount of inspections that were conducted from 2019 to 2023 as a ratio of the amount of warning letters, the increases are staunch, particularly over COVID, right? This is when investigators didn't go out and inspections were really only made under extremely risk-based circumstances. And then even on top of that, a lot of document requesting and other activities, other technologies were utilized in order to make these assessments and write warning letters. That has in some way stopped, but even the Government Accountability Office has published through 2022 and 2023 that leaning on foreign inspection reports, doing more document requests, activities that continue to enforce compliance but aren't direct inspections are efficient, so they should continue. So that's been a bit of a deviation there. So again, just to recap, these types of analysis by volume essentially allows you to understand that these documents are credible and useful. So now we want to look at the content within the documents. This brings you to part 3 and part 4. So now we're really thinking about, okay, great, I've walked you through the warning letter landscape. We understand they exist and why they're important. Now, what can we get out of them? Quite literally, what can we get out of them in the classic realm? And then part 4 is more of utilizing NLP and more vectorized based ways of extraction. But classically, warning letters do a couple of things. They cite CFR codes. So you can look at the codes of federal regulation that are within warning letters and what the agency is essentially writing up against, right? So this is a bit of a recap on this multimodal approach. So yeah, spoke a bit about that. Again, also touching on the fact that the Government Accountability Office wants to see foreign inspection reports and other things utilized for action issuance. These types of things are not noted in the inspections dashboard, but warning letters can come from them. Other things like that. Remote assessments are a key indication of why the rates were so high for warning letter to inspection issuance over the COVID pandemic. And also another reason rates were so high over the COVID pandemic was, of course, you couldn't go inspect firms. Enough about COVID. Okay. Moving through this into this essential extraction base. So this is still quantity focus. And I'm essentially going to move through into this is again touching on the rise of issuance. I kind of spoke through a lot of these things. So assessing.
Sorry, I have a quick question. Just in terms of what you just said about the remote audits and what is the correlation between higher citations? What was the cause of that?
Yeah, so what I was
What do you
trying
think
to dictate through
these would be?
was that remote inspections, document requests, these are reasons why that graph I had shown, why warning letter issuance versus inspection volume was so high, because a remote document request and then the issuance of a warning letter that's one warning letter and 0 inspections. So the fraction ends up being higher as a point quantity over inspections.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And then, like I had said, moving on to assessing data from warning letters. How do we move from there. So warning letters are generally written and they cite codes of federal regulations and predicate rules. And also the agency publishes data on codes of federal regulations against 483s and some inspection data. So what you can end up doing, and what I'll sort of gently walk through now, is you can take CFR codes for inspections, for 483s, and for warning letters. And like I had been doing, you can normalize the amount over the total amount of inspections, the total amount of 483s, and the total amount of warning letters for any given filter, right? So we want to look at just drugs. Perhaps we want to look at just a certain period of time, maybe a certain program, etc. So this is one walkthrough of that situation, right? So here's 21 CFR 211-192, production record review. And this is the quantities of that code within 483s. So 21 CFR 211-192 was cited 174 times in 483s. And then for our date range of 2019 to 2023, there were 328 total related inspections in the drug landscape with OAI and VAI. And so you can take that fraction. You can do the same thing for warning letters. So how many warning letters had this specific CFR code for all of our filters over the filtered amount of total warning letters? You end up with these two rates. You also end up with these two fractions. And then you can essentially make an assessment. How frequently, how much is the agency either making observations on this or industry reaction on this? You maybe can't always drill down to a direct root cause, but you can certainly start to understand the trend or a historic trend. So one other way to visualize how this looks is a Sankey diagram example. So this provides a really nice metric for how many 483s had 21 CFR 211.192. That's 174. And then from those 174, 12 companies went on to have a warning letter with the same CFR code. And then from the total amount of 483s, there were also 12 warning letters with this CFR code, but the 483s did not cite the CFR code. So this is a particular example where resolution rate from 483s with the CFR code to warning letters is particularly high, and the amount of use of this CFR code within warning letters is also not particularly high. So the likelihood firms are able to resolve such an issue is pretty high. That's what I touched on. Okay, so that's a direct extraction and analysis of CFR codes. Maybe this left you thinking, okay, that's great, George, but what else? Why is this important? Why would this relationship be meaningful to me if I already read the warning letters or I know this? So that kind of brings us on to documents and data sets, where we're moving into a world where, as soon as someone talks about AI, particularly in our quality environment or our GMP manufacturing environment, right? Then we need to do a risk assessment. What are the outcomes of using AI to make any particular decision? Human in the loop. Like, these are probably the things that might start running through the quality team's mind, right? So the reason we can use this data is it doesn't use AI. And so if you're going to make particular risk assessment decisions or want to integrate certain document writing processes or use this type of data, you can essentially have real facts help drive your conclusions. So what that really means moving forward is you can take the methods used for a CFR code and start to think about if you're going to use them for a keyword, for example. So, I put a tool here, LangChain, is essentially one non-AI extraction-based tool you can use to make queries against warning letter data. But there's all kinds of ways you can essentially build a technical stack to assess this data. What becomes important out of it, beyond that, is what you do with it. So I'm going to kind of show you, we can extract data, we can provide a prompt, you could use AI, and you can go through the keyword methodology. So you're essentially using a certain list of tools to extract subject line keywords from warning letters. Kind of the visual version, right? We take the data, we extract and store the keywords, and then we relation all of this data. What you end up with, if you essentially repeat this process time over time, is a bunch of subject top terms. So this is what you end up getting if you took all of the drug-related warning letters and wanted to go through top keywords, top subjects for these documents. Now, this is where we can relate it back to CFR codes and predicate rules, because you can conduct an assessment of the warning letters that had both the keyword and the CFR code. Obviously, 210 and 211, oh my God, George, duh. Yes, duh, because they should have the most amount of keywords because they're always frequently cited. Everything is either 210 or 211 in this environment for these keywords. So you end up with essentially 100% co-occurrence rate for the document set. And then you can start to essentially understand whether or not there's certain keywords, like prescription drugs and others. I think these are a little off. But for prescription drugs and the exact CFR code that aligns with it, right? So 201.5 is adequate directions for use. And then what relates to adequate directions for use on a CFR code basis? So what we're doing is aligning the predicate rule, the CFR code, with certain subjects and topics. Why am I presenting this to you? And this is something I'd love for anyone to chime in on, but as we know, the FDA doesn't really push out new laws. There's not a new CFR code every day. So what ends up happening is a guidance is issued, industry reads the guidance, industry comments on the guidance. There's lots of buzz about the guidance, and then nothing, right? You don't hear about the guidance. The guidance doesn't get cited in the 483. The guidance doesn't get cited in the warning letter. What ends up happening is the investigator needs to find a way to take the guidance and essentially cite on past regulations, some form of the codes of federal regulations. So you end up with a sort of vague CFR code citation, maybe some comments and text around it, but you don't actually end up knowing, oh, look, they didn't follow this part of the guidance, right? So that's really why I'm presenting this type of square to you today, is because we want to slowly start taking guidances and other text-based documents and relating them to the exact CFR codes and potential citations so we can understand.
George, while you were talking, I visited your site, and the first thing that struck me is you start off by talking about pharmaceuticals. In my quick glance, I didn't see you talking about medical devices really much at all. Of course, there's combination products and the like where it's relevant. I'm curious about your customer base, or if you're still in beta. Is your customer the manufacturer or the consultants that serve them? And this is why I ask, because I, in my time in industry, had folks with true value add concepts like yours. But I'm thinking, I don't have a warning letter right now, so do I really need this? I mean, isn't it relevant if I have a 483 or a warning letter so that I can parse the data and understand what to do? So it seems very like, now I need it, now I don't, now I need it, now I don't. What's your business model? How does that work?
Yeah, Joe, this is a bit of a shift from the research and what I was speaking on.
Of course, I know.
Is there any particular question on what I was speaking on prior to this? Otherwise, I'm happy to spend the remainder of the chat on this topic. Yeah.
Well, it's funny, you kind of put me on the spot, like, were you listening to what I said? Yes, very much so, but because we're all different functions, we approach things with different eyes. I'm a marketing strategist, and product, price, place, promotion, you've got an awesome product.
Thank you.
I don't understand how, if I were on your team, how I would market it to whom, who is your target? What is the primary benefit they're going to derive? Clearly, they
Yeah.
can use a lot of this data, but who? And I would think that a consultant who has many companies coming at them with warning letters and other regulatory concerns come to them for advice. And that's across industry, across many companies. But would I, as a manufacturer, need my own? I imagine you're selling seats or licenses. Would I need one?
Yeah. Joe, we work with both consultants and manufacturing firms. The business model is geared to accommodate both types of stakeholders. However, generally, the status quo in industry has been that manufacturers and larger companies purchase the product, and then consultants, as well as these third-party reviewers, generally are able to have logons and seats under the companies they do the work for.
So, if you had an outbound sales team, do they focus like, hey, we're going to go get some manufacturing accounts, or we're going to go look for the large consultants to, you can't focus on everything. So where's the board and you and your team saying, this is where we need to focus, this is where the money is?
Joe, if I can add something coming from
Please.
a large global industry,
Yes.
with global companies, they usually have groups working as a global department. So, for example, one of our primary interest group is auditors who are dispatched around the international markets to audit their manufacturers, CDMOs, CMOs. They would benefit from reviewing various type of warning letters, 483s, because they work on, like you said, for consultants, very important, but the same with the global companies. They train the auditors for a specific audit, specific subject of inspection or audit. However, they also cross-train. They want to have a knowledge to be able to answer FDA questions on inspection. So I'm bridging here between auditors for a global large pharma going to audit entire market of their suppliers. Then they need a knowledge quite diverse, so they can well prepare companies, those global companies, to the FDA or another regulatory body inspections. So similar to consultants, the data intelligence, data knowledge for a big pharma is extremely important. They want to promote their company that they understand, they know, they can predict their own trends. So they use various type of resources to be prepared for both audits and inspections. If I answer your questions a little.
No, you did. And I think you're saying among manufacturers, it makes sense for larger ones with lots of products. This wouldn't be something for startups to invest their first couple dollars in.
Right. And I was.
Yes, and it all depends again, because you also have to look at supplier management activities. So when you have all of this information in one location, and you can rely on that information and the ability that you can do to do search and research on based on the information you have, if you're part of a supplier management group and you're trying to figure out, who to get APIs from or who to get certain products from, you're going to use this product as part of your research. And this is one part that is going to help you, number one. Number two, the industry has consistently gone through ups and downs because there are many factors that actually make the industry not be as consistent as it should be. If we were aerospace, we would be in full decline because we would have like a crash every 5 minutes, right? But as an industry, yeah, we have 4 rejections and we have 4 to perform badly. And the challenge that the industry has moving forward, especially with biological products, is really to be as the best as they can be. George talked about 192. Do you know how many years we've been talking about 192 and how is it that companies should be able to do good production records review, how could they do good investigations? This process that George is putting together, it's going to allow companies to really look at warning letters, not only from a reactive perspective, but also from a proactive perspective. And this is part of the selling that we have to do and that we're going to do, because what we really want is for companies to engage more into self-regulation, less reactive, and to be more proactive. That's really where they're going to make their money.
Thank you for that. And Rama, I see you have your hand raised.
Hi, Joe. Thanks. So I've spoken with a manufacturer, and they've been in operation for like 15 years, and they haven't had an FDA inspection since 2017. It's low risk medical devices. No complaints, really no adverse events, never had any kind of concerns. But they were mentioning that they haven't had an FDA inspection because they were MDSAP certified. And I was just wondering, I've never really, heard that as a factor in terms of the frequency of FDA inspections. Is MDSAP certification something that would impact the frequency?
I'm not aware of that, so I am hesitant to comment. But what I'm thinking is that it depends on the type of product that they sell, the type of medical device, because if it's a 510(k) innocuous product, I don't see the FDA sort of, again, because of the challenges they have with resources, I don't see the FDA sort of prioritizing. But are they due for an inspection? I can tell you right now, I have pharmaceutical clients that have issued field alert reports on specific activities. And under normal circumstances, I would have expected the FDA to do a follow-up inspection, and that inspection has not occurred. So I think, again, the agency is probably trying to maneuver as much as it can within a risk-based approach. So I don't know the answer to your question, but I'm speculating that from all normal circumstances, they should have been inspected already.
Yeah, I thought so as well. It's just since 2017, that's quite a period of time.
I agree with you. I totally agree with you. And I tell you, I've seen clients that have submitted new products to the market, and they have not received a pre-approval inspection, which to me is okay. It is what it is.
Estee, welcome. You had a comment.
Yeah, just to give some clarity on the prior question, MDSAP is actually a program within the medical device industry that the FDA is one of 5 countries that participate in, and one of the benefits of participating in MDSAP is you do get removed from the FDA's routine surveillance schedule. However, they still have the opportunity to perform an inspection if they have a for cause.
Thank you for that.
That makes a lot of sense, yes.
Somebody sent you a heart.
Yeah, I was just planning to say this. So yeah, very ST. That's I definitely agree.
Yeah, I guess we're just about at time. I don't have much else to conclude. And again, thank you, Sean, for the opportunity to present today. Thank you all for the fruitful discussion. I would also conclude, I was talking about AI vector-based searches, and this is really the goal, right? Is to take guidances and start to see past documents and past records and examples like the Abiomed case, where AI and ML was a guidance the FDA issued, and here's a direct example with what Abiomed did within their pacemaker app. So things like this are what we want to monitor for. And the real reason here is to help back your arguments, provide insight, and increase the baseline for compliance. Again, thank you. Thank you guys for the fruitful discussion. I appreciate it.
You, George, and thanks for bringing along your friends Daniel and
Yeah.
Is it pronounced Ligia?
Yeah, it's perfect. Ligia is good. It's a Polish name.
Okay. Well, thank you both.
Thank you for
And,
asking.
and for those of you who send me a LinkedIn invite, I'll respond to them later on. After this call, I need to do something, but we'll be in touch.
Sean, bring us home.
Hey, I was so glad that you showed up. I met a lot of interesting people at the RAPS convention, and hopefully we'll have some more of them on of everyone. And thank you for everyone who showed up today. And I encourage you to think about joining us in California if you're able to. George, that includes you. And I'll talk to you soon. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thank you,
Thanks.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Great webinar. Thank you for hosting.
Great day, guys.